It's challenging to imagine that Bradford King, a policeman who dedicated the majority of his life to the police department, also serves as a criminology lecturer at Western Michigan University.
You know, he can conceive the most ingenious crime scenario that could be proven without the criminal's confession. Initially they were curious, but they didn't anticipate such consequences. During his tenure at the institute, his life was settling.
His wife Diane became a popular TV presenter. The couple moved to a large country house and raised their second child, but the good times didn't last long. Diane acquired a crazy stalker who would call their home, ask her out for dinner to meet up, and once break a window and get into the house. But what frightened the couple was a note, compiled with letters from newspaper headlines and what that writes here. "You must have dinner with me." And a year later, Brad found his wife's body outside the house. Their 2 children were nearby. The murder of the TV presenter made a lot of noise, and the police took on the case. The investigation revealed that a sniper had shot from the adjacent stable. They found a .22 caliber cartridge case there, and the rifle was in the nearby. The dog followed the trail, and describing an arc, returned home.
It turns out the criminal made a circuit and returned to the scene of the crime, where the police and when I noticed it, but the main thing is that
forensic experts couldn't match the bullets from the victim's body with the gun. They were severely deformed, and understanding anything was impossible.
the investigation hit at that end and took an unexpected turn, but before I will tell you about it, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the same criminology student, which Brad taught, and let's try to understand what a perfect crime.
Now you will learn, what do a person's traces reveal? What happens if you cut off fingerprints? How to confuse bloodhounds? What do modern headhunters look like? What do traces on bullets indicate? And is it possible to commit a crime that no one will ever solve?
So that you understand, every second we learn about traces, which is studied by traceology. It's a branch of criminology about traces, any kind.
These are traces of hands, feet, teeth, blood. Some remain from the subject itself, while others only leave a contour. Even on the moon, humans have left traces, but that's a different study area.
You know, a good traceologist is someone with wings. At the crime scene, they fly above the floor and look for other traces, without leaving their own. The main thing for archaeologists is footwear marks. They can tell not only the breadth of sneakers, but also gender, weight, height, the direction of movement, and even the way a person's walk.
Trace is left on a flat surface. It's photographed, then taken with a special film or a device with a funny name. A trace finder. If the traces are on the ground, they are collected along with the soil in the laboratory.
Next we'll learn my height from the footprints. Yes, and it's possible.
Here's the formula. Insert foot length here, width. Multiply the foot length by 3.1, the width by 4, then add 53.
Yes, almost 180. That's how I found out my height. And footprints can even reveal a person's occupation.
Sailors accustomed to keeping balance on deck rely on the outer side of their foot. On the other hand, figure skaters and hockey players rely on the inner side. It's as if they're pushing off the ice with their skates.
Criminals leave not only biological tracers, but also tool marks.
Look, on the tampered lock, you can see marks from the pick lock. The fewer traces, the calmer and more experienced the criminal was. But some don't bother and force the door, cut the door panel, or drill the tailpiece. And this is how a padlock is broken in 3 seconds.
Tire tracks too can reveal a lot.
Tire tracks depend on wear and the vehicle's speed. At 5 kilometers per h, the contact patch is a normal square, but at 125 kilometers per h, the car is flying, looking like a Rorschach test or lines.
The arms race also work here. Knowing these techniques, criminals also learn to bypass them. They walk backwards, tying another shoe to their oven, but backward with the toes. They wear boot covers, cut off the soles, dispose of tools, change tires and change cars. But it's very difficult to get rid of invisible traces.
The smell is the oldest of the senses. Even bacteria can sense molecules. The scent of each person is unique. It's impossible to change or get rid of it.
In forensics, authors studies bioderology. The scent is most reliably preserved in clothing, furniture, and blood. When it coagulates, it seals in the scent. This is called the phenomenon of spilled blood. So, the victim blood seals the scent of the killer and helps to find them.
Objects with the smell of a criminal are wrapped in foil, and in the laboratory, the odor is sealed on a cotton cloth. The odor is stored in the freezer for 5 years.
After that, the smells need to be compared. A person usually cannot distinguish between them, and this is where dogs come in. Their olfactory system has an area of 100 square centimeters, while ours is only 4. And it's not just German Shepherd, it can be any dog.
For a dog, scent detection is a game. Containers with fabric are placed in a circle. The handler and the dog take turns going around them all. The dog handler does not know where each of them is. If the dog stops on one of the containers, it is a signal. The containers are changed, and the experiment is repeated. If this happens 3 times out of 3, the scent is found.
A device that recognizes odors like a dog has been tried for decades.
The simplest of these devices is a police alcohol analyzer, breathalyzer, but it reacts to only one specific substance, while the smell consists of hundreds of components. To outwit the dogs, criminals scatter food, for example sausage, spraying themselves with air freshener to overwhelm the scent, and swimming across a river to throw off the dog's trail.
You know, criminals have been using these tricks for centuries. Okay, but what's the first scene that comes to mind when we say forensics?
Yes, fingerprints. Fingerprints are studied by dactyloscopy. They are easy to leave, easy to detect, and hard to erase. They are formed even before we are born, in the 3rd month of pregnancy. Today, we unlock smartphones with our fingers, but the idea is 150 years old. Here is William Herschel, the grandson of astronomer William Herschel, who discovered the planet Uranus. While working in colonial India, he noticed that the locals signed documents indiscriminately and did not feel obliged to fulfill what they signed.
Just like we do when we sign user agreements, just don't say you have read them. So Hershey came up with a clever trick.
He made the Indians put their fingerprints under the signature. They considered the fingerprint to be something sacred.
And they began to fulfill what they signed.
And that's how Herschel changed the rules of the game. Each fingerprint is a set of patterns, waves, arcs, loops, or vortices. This set distinguishes one fingerprint from another.
In addition, the variety of patterns is different for different nations.
Look, Eskimo fingerprints consist mostly of swirls, whereas Europeans are dominated by loops. Now guess whose fingerprints these are? An Indian's? A Norwegian? An Australian Aborigine? No, they are koalas. The patterns on their fingers help them climb the eucalyptus trees.
If your group of crazy, money-crazy greedy costs rob at a bank, I can assure you that forensic scientists would mistake them for humans. So all you have to do to get away with it is to remove the fingerprints off your fingers, right?
No, believe me, we are not the first to think of this. This lovely woman is Ma Barker, one of the most wanted gangsters of the 1930s. When her son and his mistress were on the run, they asked Joseph Moran, an alcoholic who treated gangsters, to remove the prints from their fingers. The doctor shaved the skin off their fingers, and Ma Barker eased their pain with morphine.
But the torture was in vain, because the new skin that grew back showed the same papillary lines. Dissatisfied gangsters took Moran, who was drunk, took him to Lake Michigan, and drowned the poor guy. And that was it. That's the story.
Unfortunately, they didn't know that fingerprints change over time. All they had to do was lie low for 10 years. But there is an easier way. Use gloves. It works flawlessly. What do you think it is? A child's drawing? A character from a cartoon? No, it's just the worst sketch you've ever seen.
And even found the perpetrator. It was
Van Fuak stole money in a shopping center. This is not a joke. Look at the main facial features converge. Eyes and mouth, and most importantly, this scared face.
And this is what habitoscopy does, but the most famous sketches are like this.
Oh, those were the days. In those days, no one even wrote the reason. They just wrote alive or dead. It was enough to write the amount and let it be. But did you ever wonder who pays for it?
The criminals themselves pay. Have you even heard the criminals released on bail? So, if they escaped after that bail, for that bail bounty hunters are hired. Yes, this way the country doesn't spend taxpayers' money on capturing them, and the criminals pay for their pursuit, and sometimes even for their murder.
Bounty hunters still legally exist in the Philippines and the USA. They're armed with guns, tasers, or pepper sprays. But here's Dwayne Chapman, known as Dog. He caught 8,000 people with his bare hands, simply because he's prohibited from carrying weapons due to his criminal record.
But in our time, criminals are sought after based on a drawing.
Forensic scientists create portraits on cards or film. You take mustache hash 1, overlay it on nose hash 3 and eyes hash 5. Voila! You get the sought-after dude. The easiest way to do this is using the Faces program. We're looking for clear eyes, a straight nose, lips, a chin, and finally, long hair. Recognized him, right? It's Jesus Christ. That's how Catholics describe him. And here's the African Jesus. That's how Africans describe him.
Why I'm mentioning this? Because we have different images of the same person in our heads, and witness experience the effect aren't able to remember all these details accurately. Moreover, criminals can wear glasses, mustache, a beard, or simply a mask. Anyway, let me tell you a story.
In 1929, when Al Capone's people, disguised as policemen, shot 7 members of Bugs Moran's gang, there were many bullets and shells left at the crime scene.
The criminals would never have been found, if not for the bullets.
They were fired from a .45 caliber Thompson submachine gun, but almost every gang had such guns.
Okay, but how do you determine which gang it was? Had only one bullet and one shell. Let me explain, because ballistics study firearms. The primary task of ballistician is to understand what and how it was fired.
Bullets, shells, and bullet holes are photographed. They're measured to know where the criminal shot from, and gunpowder gases reveal the distance of the shot. The closer, the more residue it leaves. Here's a point-blank shot, and here, a shot from a meter away. And here, pay attention to the rifling marks. These grooves are the individual stamp of the barrel. They are left by rifled barrels. In smoothbore firearms, the bullet flies unevenly, turning from side to side, constantly wobbling and swaying. Suvorov's words, "The bullet is dumb and the bayonet is smart," apply specifically to smoothbore firearms. Everything is different in rifled firearms. The bullet starts rotating within the barrel, preventing it from wobbling from side to side. To feel this, try turning a wrist exercise or gyroscope. It's very challenging. The found bullets are rotated 360 degrees and photographed. It results in this layout. Ballisticians find the weapon and fire it into a bullet catcher, then compare the pattern on the bullet they found at the crime scene. If they match, that's it. The weapon is found.
The Thompson submachine gun, found with Al Capone's gang, left the same pattern as the bullets at the crime scene. That's how the forensic scientists managed to convict the killers. By the way, this was the first case when rifled firearms helped catch criminals. Yes, the first case. Since then, criminals have been trying to discard their weapon or make notches of the bullets quickly.
Now imagine that the criminal followed all these rules, put on a mask, gloves, blocked the smell, marked the bullet, threw away the weapon and dumped it in the river, but it would not save him, and do you know why?
Because even standing still, you'll scatter your DNA. How much material do you think is needed to identify you? Answer is simple, just 8 cells. People are 99.9% similar to each other, and that 0.1% make us different.
This is how you look in the language of genes. These lines, that's you.
Maybe it's time to use this instead of a phone to confirm identity. And you know?
Biological material needs to be packed and collected as soon as possible. It could be hair or a microscopic piece of skin. Then in the lab, they use a reagent to break down cells and free DNA from its shackles. The material is scanned and compared with other samples.
Only through DNA you can determine gender, ethnicity, blood type, and if it's in the database, even a specific individual.
In the 19th century, psychiatrist Cesare Lombroso said that criminals are born, not made.
Okay, genetics can partly agree with him. Yes, aggression can be inherited in a person, but who they become depends on their environment and decision.
Remember the perfect crime from the beginning of the segment. The cop and his wife, the TV presenter.
It's time to tell you about it and how the story ended.
10 months after the murder, FBI agents decided to re-examine the anonymous letter. Such notes are left by those whose handwriting can be recognized.
This suggests that the killer was well acquainted with the victim, and the carelessly placed letters were just an attempt to confuse the investigation. But who was well acquainted with the victim, knew about forensics, and sought a way to commit the perfect crime?
That very policeman, Bradford King. It turned out he was cheating on his wife and constantly engaging in shady dealings with students.
and he was never around during the calls.
And later, in one of the neighboring houses, a real gun was found, from which the shot was fired.
It wasn't for nothing that Brad asked the students to come up with the perfect crime. They helped kill his wife. They advised mimicking the behavior of a maniac, escaping through the water, and then returning to the scene of the crime. And one student even suggested planting a second weapon at the crime scene. Something that would be impossible to prove. But even an experienced forensic scientist wouldn't foresee everything, and although the accusation was based on a circumstantial evidence.
Brad King was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. He is currently alive and remains in prison, never admitting his guilt.
You know, any perfect crime ceases to be such when forensic scientists solve it, but there's one case which I liked. It's considered the most perfect.
This is the case of D.B. Cooper. In '71, he hijacked a plane, extorted $200,000 ransom for the passengers, released them, took off with the plane, and calmly parachuted away, leaving the pilots alone. After 40 years of investigation, he was never found. All that's left is a composite sketch.
But we do love Williams after all. See you guys.